Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill, along with Andrew Moran, John Clark, Dave Patterson, and Graham Noble. And this is The Conservative Five, an online TV production of Liberty Nation News. On today's episode, now playing in the swamp, bait, switch, and collusion. The biggest scandal to rock the states on the agenda in For Whom the Bell Tolls, Joe Biden. And 100 days to focus on American health. We'll dish about that in RFK's Scorched Earth MAHA movement. And are the Republicans taking refuge in their own basements these days? We ferret them out in GOP Weebles Wobble. Will they fall down? Finally, it's another quick fix to flex the brain in Just for Fun, Volume 72. All this and more in this edition of The Conservative.
Can anyone guess what the S stands for?
Shut up. It was the most poorly kept secret in D.C., a city known all too well for poorly kept secrets. The supposed leader of the free world was neither mentally nor physically up to the job. Before the very eyes of the American people, Joe Biden was deteriorating. It seemed as if every time he appeared in public, Biden said or did something bizarre. There were confusing monologues, blank 1,000-yard stares, mouth agape for minutes at a time, and then the diagnosis with prostate cancer, which has metastasized to his bones. A sitting president. Best health care in the world. Seriously? We've said our condolences for this man. But now let's talk about what the American people have just been through. Lead us off, Graham, please.
Well, I'm going to start by saying that, in my view, this is the biggest political scandal in American history. To me, this way outstrips Watergate. And the reason why I say that is because we found ourselves in a situation, even though we didn't know it at the time, well, some of us suspected it. We found ourselves in a situation where the guy who is supposedly running the country, the guy who was elected, I will use that word with hesitancy, but that's just me. He's not.
Let's clarify, the election was confirmed. It was certified.
It was confirmed. The official result said that.
Official result. All right.
But here's the man, and let's forget that. Let's forget quibbling over 2020 right now, and let's just say, okay, he was the elected president, but he wasn't running the country. There was a cabal of other people in the White House making decisions, possibly for most of that 4 years, at least for the last year or so. And when certain people in this country like to go on about threats to democracy, well, okay, we're not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. But nevertheless, they talk about threats to democracy all the time. And here we had a group of unelected people calling the shots. And so that is what makes it the biggest scandal in history. Now, as for the cancer thing, well, you don't suddenly get stage 4 metastatic cancer. It doesn't happen. And so therefore, he must have had that for at least a couple of years, and probably from everything I've read, chances are 3 to 4 years.
And likely was not allowed to be treated for it.
Right. And that is the terrible thing. I mean, look, I am no fan of Joe Biden whatsoever. I think he was actually a rather unpleasant individual for his entire political career. But it is shocking, the fact that this man may have actually been denied like life-saving treatment because the people around him didn't want anyone to know that he had this illness. I mean, they were even trying to cover up the fact that he was, he's slurring his speech a little bit and kind of wandering off, endlessly down runways on airports so that his Secret Service detail had to chase him back to the car. They were worried about, they were already trying to cover that up, let alone the cancer.
That perception versus, the perception that you cannot see.
Yeah. And so what you had here at the end of the day was a group of people who were determined to keep up the facade so that they could actually run the country and implement their agenda And in the meantime, you could almost say, in the meantime, possibly cost this man, Joe Biden, his life, or at least deprived him of the chance of having some treatment that would have given him a longer life.
You know what, Dave, just how egregious were the actions of those around Joe Biden and Kamala Harris? I mean, what kind of penalties, if any, are they likely to face if we ever get to the bottom of this?
I don't think they'll face any penalties. We've never had a circumstance well, we have actually President Woodrow Wilson, where his wife provided the the caretaker presidency. But effectively, that was for 17 months, and very little was at stake. However, with 4 years with Joe Biden, I mean, what Biden and his staff and wife and his family did in hiding Biden's incapacity was despicable. Was it treasonous? Probably not. We've just never had, a codified breaking of the law that looked just like this. But it was heinous, absolutely heinous that this would go on. And now you look at all of the failures that he had in his presidency, from Putin in June of 2021, which led to the buildup of forces on the Ukraine border, where he did fundamentally nothing. His pathologically moronic decision-making in the disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal. Where were...
Okay, but were those even his decisions? I mean, it doesn't seem like he made any of those decisions.
Yeah. My point would be where were those crackerjack general officers that were so clever and stood by this guy? Where were they? And obviously, they were trying to cover their own career butts. But, in every single decision point for the last 4 years is now questionable. It was questionable at the time because we thought it was wrong-headed, but little did we know that it was no-headed. And so this is a circumstance which we simply have never experienced before. And, this is exactly what the 25th Amendment was ratified back in 1967. This is precisely the circumstance that prompted...
They could not afford Kamala Harris.
Well, okay, so, we dodged a bullet, right,
I don't know, but I do have a big problem still. And I'm going to ask our lovely counselor on panel today, Mr. John Clark, about the just ridiculous auto pen use. I mean, is that going to come back and bite this administration, or are we stuck on that too and we can't do anything about that?
Well, I think we're stuck, but I think it is a particularly salient point now. Donald Trump had cautioned that the precautionary pardons back in March, I think he said, were void and vacant, and questioned their legitimacy. And he's certainly being vindicated now, which really, more broadly, some people at times, maybe under their breath, called it the weekend at Bernie's, presidency. It now looks like it really was, and that the party of the ends justify any means possible, and the mainstream media who cooperate with them are now complicit on the record. And Dave said there'll be no penalty. Well, there may be no penalty in the courts, but there seems to be a political penalty. And while many want to focus on Donald Trump's latest speech for Memorial Day or what have you, it seems like they have total blinders on the left about any accountability whatsoever, any concern that our entire administration was hijacked. And so where the auto pen comes in is very interesting because, President Biden did confirm his auto pen signing of thousands of pardons and release of criminals. He did do that. But as one group has been evaluating, at least 8 very substantial, really potent changes in energy policy in particular were implemented based on EOs signed by an auto pen without any corroborating confirmation by Joe Biden in any oral presentations. He never referenced them, which raises the question about who was behind them at all. Now, whether that impacts their legitimacy because Donald Trump can simply reverse them and we move on. I don't know. It seems to me that a very interesting executive order by our current president would be to ban the auto pen, because the problem wouldn't exist if we didn't have one. George Bush never used it. I think Obama was the first one to use it that's documented. Just get rid of the thing. When in doubt, throw it out. But definitely the recent revelations have exponentially amplified the analysis of everything he ever signed and thrown it all in doubt now. If the auto pen had not been in use, we wouldn't have that added layer of confusion and lack of insight. We don't really know.
Well, and here's what I'm going to ask you, Andrew. Let's say, we spend the next 3.5 years on AutoPen, and all of the bizarre stuff that happened in this administration with the health and the crises and the random stuff. This is egg on the face of the Biden hiders globally. So how are they going to handle this? How's the media going to handle this, Andrew? Are they going to go, oh, well, we didn't know, but yeah, we're going to back off and we're going to start telling you the truth?
You're already seeing that. See, there's Jake Tapper. He seems to be the one who's carried the mantle, who's been forced to carry the mantle for the mainstream media and go on this apology tour. Or if you want to use Jake Tapper's constant word, humility. He's practicing humility. Looking back on his coverage, it's all this humility that's going on. He's hired, obviously, a public relations agency, but overall, you're seeing the new narrative being peddled by the mainstream media, or particularly Jake Tapper, because now he's saying, yes, I can't believe the Biden administration and the Biden White House, shielded all this information from us. How could they deceive us like this? But now, you know what? The Trump administration, they're not being forthright when it comes to President Trump's health records. So you know what this means? They're gonna emphasize now Trump's health, his cognitive abilities, his physical health. I think the great example that's going to happen in the future is the way Jake Tapper, for example, covered Trump's health in the first term. He would have all these segments talking about Trump's mental fitness. Oh my goodness, Trump, he held a bottle with 2 hands opposed to 1. Oh, he walked down a steep slope very slowly. It's just
made it up the freaking stairs to the plane, at least.
Yeah, exactly. So this whole thing with Joe Biden, it's just a cover-up for it to something larger to now just expose Trump and claim that his health is under attack or his cognitive abilities are declining. So I just find this whole thing moronic. And Jake Tapper, I can't buy anything he's saying at all, because the public relations people are feeding him these lines to use to make him seem like, oh, I'm a holy figure now in the mainstream media. Trust me, trust what I'm saying. And now I'm for sure going to go after the White House until the next person succeeds. Trump with the donkey on the side.
All right. Well, you know what, guys? Say what you will, but this is the biggest underhanded scandal of modern day politics. I mean, if you're not looking into this, you're not doing due diligence, you're not being a critical thinker. This needs full disclosure to the American people now. Not like Epstein, not like the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. Now, the bell tolls, and it has to toll for Joe Biden. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being with us today. RFK Jr., the man that terrifies the bought and paid for allies of Big Pharma and poisonous foods, has just submitted a 69-page breakout report in his first 100 days as the health guru for America. And it has hit the sweet spot, some might say. When we say prevention and not just treat symptoms, that's not Big Pharma and fake food goals. And that's why childhood chronic diseases, including cancer, mental health disorders, allergies, diabetes, and neurological conditions, are rising as visibly as the body weights of morbidly obese 5-year-olds.
Congress is controlled in so many ways by the pharmaceutical industry. There's at least one pharmaceutical lobbyist for every congressman, every senator in Capitol Hill, and every member of the Supreme Court. By some estimates, 3. Pharmaceutical companies, the industry itself, spends 3 times what the next largest lobbyist spends on lobbying. So this was an issue that people talked about, but nobody wanted to do anything because it was radioactive. They knew you couldn't get it by Congress.
RFK Jr. can hold his own for sure. Let's discuss. John Clark?
Well, I think you've hit upon it. You mentioned prevention, but also, as the clip showed, transparency. Bobby Kennedy campaigned on the issue of regulatory capture, and that's contained in the report, a very detailed analysis. There is also regulatory capture in the big food industry, though, as he points out, more prominently in big pharma. But politically and policy-wise, the MAHA report was really quite fascinating because it doesn't propose radical changes other than in sort of a radical transparency with credible scientific studies to more fully look at the problem and to fully look at the problem. That is, it's holistic. It wasn't just about pharmaceuticals or SSRIs in particular, the increase in anxiety, depression, mental health issues. It also talked about food quality and whole foods were very much emphasized. It talked about exercise. It talked about social media and how that's damaging children's minds and contributing. All of these are factors combined. It even talks about getting kids out in nature more. And so it was a very powerful report, and it was, largely cabinet wide. It had a lot of voices in there. And now who could ever disagree with that? And what's interesting about that is that there are some who are going to oppose even lowering prescription drug prices, as Bernie Sanders was criticizing that, even though he's been pushing for that for years. This is kind of similar. This should be a positive that all Americans embrace. But something else about this report that maybe was a little behind the scenes is that there isn't just the usual bipartisan division between Republicans and Democrats. There's actually a division that you don't really see with big pharma in big food, and that's between conventional agriculture and organic or regenerative agriculture. Mm-hmm. And they had to really navigate that political minefield as well. Big pharma is kind of narrow. Big food includes a lot of farmers and ranchers who have huge political voices and get very upset if they feel their livelihood is threatened by an attack on their beloved pesticides. So the report kind of steered a middle ground. Yes, the sweet spot is that it kind of annoyed both sides for not going far enough. And in anticipation of the report, it was already being criticized by a lot of pesticide groups and the big chemical industry. So I think it really set the stage to who could argue with doing the investigatory work, and maybe we pare back some amounts of pesticides and keep pesticides down for children's food and in school lunches, things that are manageable without it being an all or nothing affair. And that's why I think MAHA is here to stay. I think this administration is delivering on its campaign promises to actually make America healthier again.
I know you're a livestock farmer, John. I'm a dirt farmer, crop farmer, and the thing I really picked up on is the offer of choice. We have the choice to do what we want to do with how we want to raise our food around here. And I'm not, we're not big farmers. We're small family farmers. And so we make those choices depending on the market here locally, not so much globally. But anyway, I enjoyed the report, and I'm glad you were here to report on that. But most of us on panel here are of a certain age where nobody was really looking out for us. So I want to talk to Andrew. Andrew has 2 young children, and genetics, bad food, vaccinations. Andrew, being a parent, has all the thrills of a roller coaster without a seatbelt. I mean, how does MAHA land in your world? I mean, are you seeing what you would like to see improved?
Well, first, I like to declare I have award-winning genes, so I think our kids will be fine on the genetics.
Yeah, whatever. Let's not declare that. That's provable wrong. Let's go.
All right, so on the food front, I mean, it's very expensive. If you want to eat well, I've interviewed John about this on Swamponomics TV, and if you want to eat well, it's very expensive. But we're making the sacrifices, and we're serving our kids organic fruits and vegetables. We try to give them top quality meat. We don't give them crap like McDonald's or Dunkaroos or the Lunchables. If you go to my Swamponomics TV episode with John, I go through a long list of the Lunchables and all the garbage that's in that food, and that's the crap. That's the type of stuff that a lot of low income people, or even, I'm gonna say everybody, every busy parent will eventually came and give their kid that crap.
Exactly.
Our kids exercise, they take their vitamins, they get lots of vitamin D from the sun. Every time it's sunny, we try to go outside. So I would say that we were MAHA before it was cool. Okay, we were MAHA before all you youngins on there. But I will say one thing though. A few shows ago, I complained about the influenza vaccine, and I was proven correct. There was a study that came out, and it said that this year's influenza vaccine had a negative 27% efficacy rate. And that's exactly what I suspected, because our kids had they had the flu, they had the norovirus they had that, they had colds after colds after colds, and nothing seemed to work. Nothing seemed to work at all. So if I have no problem with vaccinations, I do have a problem with this influenza vaccine because it never seems to work, at least in our household's case. So, but overall, yes, I would say we were MAHA before it was cool, and I think we're doing a good job as parents.
Well, I think you are too. I will pat your shoulder as well in the hallway later. Okay, Graham. You know what? RFK, Bobby's something else. And I want to circle back around, not get too lost here in Andrew's kids, but he takes to task anyone who has any kind of clue or no clue on the Hill, and he comes prepared. How's he doing with all these people? Is he changing minds on the Hill?
I would like to think so, of course. And I believe probably he is, because so much of what he says, it's like, how can you, it's kind of coming back to one of the remarks John made there is how can you not, how can you disagree with this? How can you argue against this wish to, restrict the influence of the pharmaceutical companies on us, and also, make us eat healthier food. And, I'm not going to get into my personal habits, but a few years ago, I started making a concerted effort to eat more healthily and eat more organic foods. And in fact, I even feed my dog like the best human grade dog food you can get,
Me too.
And, so I try, but here's the thing about RFK Jr. I don't agree with all of his politics. I'm 100% behind him on the whole MAHA thing, 100%. Outside of that, I don't agree with all his politics. But nevertheless, when he goes in front of a congressional hearing, you can bet that most of the time he's the smartest man in the room.
Yeah.
And just most recently, May 24th, he was in front of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor and Pensions, and they were talking about the fiscal year 2026 budget for the Health and Human Services Department. And, Kennedy's a lot more, let's say he's less aggressive than, say, Marco Rubio or even Scott Besson. They've been in front of these committees and they've just like torn people a new one. Kirsten Noem as well. She goes there. And I love that stuff. I love that stuff. Now Kennedy's a little more polite, but he had an exchange with Bernie Sanders where, of course, Bernie hits all the normal, left wing talking points. He wanted to question Kennedy on why is the CBO estimating that the cuts to Medicare are going to make throw something like 13 million Americans off of their health insurance. And and Kennedy was like, well, I can start, and he was about to go there. He said, I've got a list. He said, I've got a list of the things that are being cut, and and I can tell you. And then of course Bernie's like, oh, I don't have time for this. It's like, well, and so Robert Kennedy said, well, you asked me the question. I'm ready to provide you with the answer. And but of course Bernie doesn't want the answers. He doesn't want anyone to
be on the record that he was a doofus. So
yeah, and then the other thing he went on, of course, was the taxes. He was like, well, the tax cuts for billionaires. And I thought Kennedy came out with a great remark. He said, well, look, Senator, he said, what we're doing is we're cutting taxes out for tips and for overtime. He said, how many billionaires do you know get tips and work overtime? So I thought that was kind of cool.
Who was the congresswoman that Kennedy said that was, what have you done for 50 years? You're complicit in all this. Who was that gal? She was a little bit taken aback.
I'm not sure who that was, but I mean, let's face it, Kennedy could...
Pretty much they all are. Both sides of the aisle have been complicit in this for too many years.
He could ask that question of probably about at least out of the entire Congress, both chambers.
Exactly.
He'd probably ask that question of at least about 100 of them.
All right. Hey, Dave, are we looking at a major success or just more roadblocks? I mean, the truth is coming out, and I think it's giving people choice. And Americans like choice. If they want to go eat something stupid, they could eat something stupid. But where are we going with this? Are we getting somewhere, or are we just spinning our wheels?
Well, I think the fact that there's a credible study, I mean, albeit done in 3 months, it's a win for Americans' health. When you see statistics like over 40% of U.S. children, which amounts to approximately 29 million out of 73 million children that are under the age of 17, have at least one chronic health condition, such as asthma, allergies, obesity, autoimmune diseases, and behavioral disorders. Well, over medication, I think, is a key driver, and it raises this issue. And it's troubling, but it goes to an equally problematic situation, and that is that, a lot of the shoot from the hip diagnoses of behavioral issues, for example, autism and ADHD, I mean, they have widened the aperture for the diagnosis to the point where if a kid gets off his bicycle on the wrong side, he's ADHD. Well, I think that what has to happen is that they have to go back and take a look at some of these diagnostic windows to determine whether or not they haven't opened the aperture just too far. And so, I think that it's going to open the door to a lot of rigorous studies, and that's a good news story. And the commission is going to come up with, in about 80 days, a strategy to address these problems. And I think that's also a good thing. So overall, I'd call it a win.
Nice. Okay. Well, you know what? America is watching as Trump and Kennedy find much needed common ground. Could be there's a huge success on the horizon for all of America. Thanks for watching. And for goodness sake, read the labels, put the poison down, and tune in next week and tell us how you're feeling. Thanks, panel. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Seems the background music of Swamp Life indicates what was once a promising summer blockbuster might be akin to a woke bomb. After months of DOGE getting all up in everyone's business, Elon Musk is taking a step back. Why for? After unveiling for the electorate and all the world to see the bloated and massive ridiculousness of USAID, the Pentagon, billions in fraud and underhanded exchanges of shekels, well, now what? Was this all about tattling and embarrassing the past keepers of the crypt, or is anything actually going to be rectified? Say it ain't so, Dave.
But it is so. Fraud, waste, and abuse are synonymous with government, no matter how you look at it. And the larger the government, the more the problem. And that's what Elon Musk found right from the get-go. Basically, the reduction in the number of people employed in government is a positive step in the right direction, something that people have been trying to do for decades and unable to do it until Elon got involved. So, letting probationary hires go first, was wise, since those employees have not qualified for the full benefit. So that was a good idea. The only savings, however, and this is important to realize, the real savings are in the year of execution. So whatever savings or any reduction in cost in FY 2025, and that ends in September 30th, as those are savings. And as of April 30th, the savings figure is somewhere around 160 billion by some estimates. Claims of savings in the out year, that's a bit more problematic because those aren't savings. That's cost avoidance, and that allows for planning and to use those numbers that are available. And it also allows you to plan for a higher budget for priority items. The big ticket item that was canceled in the U.S. Agency for International Development, and that netted $24 billion. And those principally are grants, contracts, and leases that you can cancel this year and reap the savings. Health and Human Services canceled another $15 billion, for example, in contracts, leases, and grants. And we know there has been criticism, of course, of the DOGE effort. The one I find amusing, though, is the Partnership for Public Service that claims the firing of government workers with paid leave and rehiring of those workers because of the legal challenge created a loss of productivity, which wiped out the cost savings. But just a second, wait, they were let go because they weren't needed. And you can't lose productivity if you don't have the productivity of the people who weren't productive to begin with. So, DOGE has done a good job, if for no other reason than it has shown a very bright light on a very big problem.
Sorry, Sarah, I have two questions for Dave. How much did DOGE apparently save in total so far?
The estimate that they have is $160 billion. Other estimates are lower.
Okay, and then how much is the government spending this year?
They're going to spend more than the savings.
Okay, so $7 trillion is how much? Okay, so
That's a little
up
bit
there. Sorry, guys. Also, I just wanted to clarify.
So my answer to that is they would have spent $7 trillion plus $160 billion. If this weren't the case, and spending has always been the problem, no matter how you cut it.
Okay,
$160 billion. I mean, what's that? That's about 2 months of interest payments that the U.S. government has.
Yeah, it's going to be. Congress is going to have to come to grips with the fact that they cannot continue to spend their way into rainbows and unicorns. It's just not possible.
Oh, darn it. I was kind of looking forward to ordering one off of Amazon. Well, and then there's this, not everybody is happy. Hey, Laura, back there, will you roll tape for us?
The GOP tax scam represents an assault on the economy, an assault on healthcare, an assault on nutritional assistance, an assault on tax fairness, and an assault on fiscal responsibility. There are more than 100 other reasons to vote against this one big, ugly bill.
Okay, Andrew. What about that big, beautiful bill or the big, ugly one? Or how's that going? How's that working in the Trump administration right now?
I just always find it comical when I see these lawmakers and there's something hand-wringing about fiscal responsibility that they not pay attention to the last 4 years or during the Obama administration. So I find it's so frustrating to watch because I watch all these hearings related to taxes or the economy or finance. It just frustrates me. But anyway, so on to that one big beautiful bill. I will quote Elon Musk, who's on CBS Sunday mornings. Here's a quote of what he said. "I think a bill can be big or it can be beautiful, but I don't know if it could be both." And he's absolutely correct. Yes, it is great that this bill it prevents about 2/3 of the country no longer experiencing a tax hike. It provides tax relief for families, provides tax relief for working class seniors and other non-billionaires, despite contrary to what that clip said. The problem, which is always the case, and Dave alluded to this, is the spending side. So here's a dichotomy. The Congressional Budget Office, yes, I'm not in love with it, but it's still mostly reliable, as I have told Graham in the past. It projects that the U.S. government is going to spend about $89 trillion over the next 10 years. This OBBB, it projects to spend about $88 trillion over the next 10 years. That's $1 trillion. And that's the House version. The Senate version, it actually increases spending by $2 billion over that span. So it's absolutely ridiculous. I wrestle with this because I think of what Milton Friedman said, the legendary economist. He said that you should, under any circumstances, always cut taxes. But the problem is that I don't know if he envisioned the United States government spending $1 trillion just on interest payments alone. You have a $7 trillion budget. In 10 years, it's going to be about $10 trillion according to the CBO. Now, yes, I will also concede the CBO was off about $1.5 trillion by the TCJA in 2017. The rescoring showed that the revenues were much higher than expected and growth was higher than expected. But it always comes down to the same thing of the outlays. And the only way you're going to grapple with outlays, and President Trump doesn't want to say this, and many prominent Republicans don't want to say this, is that you're going to have to eventually tackle the mandatory side of spending, which accounts for 2/3 of all annual outlays. And according to CBO, in a decade, it'll account for about 70% of all outlays. So this OBBB, if you're a fiscal conservative who worries about the deficit and debt, it's going to add just be conservative, it's going to add $3 trillion to the deficit. Now, even if you achieve, let's say, 3% growth, which Stephen Moore's group, Committee to Unleash Prosperity, says could happen, it's still going to add about $1 trillion to deficit. So it's overall, it's still deficit finance spending, and it's only going to worsen America's fiscal situation.
I might be the only guy out on this, and I'm sure Graham's going to fillet me in a minute, but I'm going to ask John Clark. I mean, is what's going on with the GOP and this hand-wringing, pearl-clutching, grenade-throwing group of people trying to get this bill passed, is it just compromise the way it should work, or does the GOP need to grow a pair? I'm just asking for a friend.
Well, that's really quite interesting. We saw the clip, and it's not like the compromise is being worked out with Democrats at all. It's almost like, they're not in the room. It's between Senate Republicans and House Republicans. And, I actually echo Andrew's idea. They know in Canada about deficit spending. We should talk about the Canadian budget sometime. But yeah, fundamentally, I think it's $3.8 trillion it's estimated to add. And I think Dave would agree that $160 billion doesn't chop that. But the real battle seems to be going on about the Senate Republicans, many of them wanting more cuts, more spending cuts, and politically trying to not have so many changes that it kicks back to the House and then eliminates that one vote margin. And so there's a lot of, infighting going on within the GOP. But interesting, Andrew also mentioned cutting spending. I mentioned in one of my articles recently about pharmaceuticals. If Donald Trump let's say he cuts $25 billion in annual spending from federal programs in prescription drug savings, then the Democrats will say, look, he cut Medicaid and Medicare. It's like if you save money, they call it taking money away from the poor. And yes, I hear this also. It's going to help billionaires. It's going to help billionaires. I think it doubles the standard deduction, and the no tax on overtime and tips were mentioned. I don't really see big advances here for the billionaires. And one thing Republicans should probably know more, and Real Clear Politics had a good opinion on this today, is that cutting these benefits, if it means cutting trans surgeries, if it means cutting Medicare or Medicaid for illegal immigrants, if it means affirming addresses to know that multiple people aren't collecting, eliminating fraud is not killing people, as the Democrats are saying. And so, the Republicans are really fighting too about the debt ceiling. They're fighting about the long-term deficit. They should be fighting about that. But they also have, I think, a mid-July deadline, in which case the ceiling kicks in. So there is a political expediency. I think a lot of us would like to see a zero increase in the total national debt, but we're working with what we have. And so in answer to your question, I think balancing the battling within the GOP and then still getting a bill together that the House will accept is where success lies. And that seems to be where the focus is. Many want more cuts.
I love what Senator Ron Johnson said. Sorry, Graham. I love when he said, he was asked about, if he says this is a terrible bill, and he was asked, what if you perturb President Donald Trump by voting against this legislation? And he said, I don't give a damn what Trump thinks or says about how I feel about this bill. That was good. Maybe I'm just paraphrasing, but that's what he said.
Oh, well, that was fun. Anyway, Graham, what's the next logical fiscal step, or is there even one?
We're dealing with here. We're dealing with government here, so the words fiscal and logical, probably shouldn't even be in the same sentence.
Sorry, yeah, that was my bad.
But the problem is, I mean, it is heartening, at least, even though it doesn't really do us much good at the end of the day. It is heartening, at least, to know that between the House and the Senate, there are actually a handful of Republicans who are really hardcore about we need to cut spending. And as Andrew said, it's not just discretionary spending. You can cut all of that you want, but we do have to look at the mandatory spending because that's the biggest part of it. And again, throwing in what John said there, the way you do that or the way you begin is to absolutely eliminate the real fraud, the real abuse, the real waste, the money that is actually going to people that don't need it or don't deserve it or just not eligible for it. And at some point, you got to do that. But, you know, no politicians other than the handful I just said, not by name, but there are a handful, but most of them, they never want to cut any money. And the Democrats don't. But at least the Democrats, I'll say one thing for Democrats, at least they don't pretend to be fiscally responsible. They don't even try to fool anyone that they are. Republicans always going on about being fiscally responsible. And you know, I would say 75% of elected Republicans are not fiscally responsible at all. And they don't really want to make these big cuts. But at the end of the day, the next real logical step, because look, if you've got an incredible amount of waste at the Department of Education, you don't cut the waste out of the Department of Education, you get rid of the Department of Education. And at the end of the day, that's the only way that the US federal government is ever going to substantially waste money and get to the point where they can maybe even reduce the national debt, is you've got to shrink the size of government by a whole bunch. I mean, my reading of the Constitution tells me that the only federal government departments there should be is the Department of Justice, the Department of State, and the Department of Defense. Beyond that, I don't see any constitutional justification for any other government departments at all. But that's just me.
Wait, Sarah, before you go, I just want to say, I have a proposal here. And I think Dave is going to be 100% behind you.
You better get on it, Andrew. Stop.
How about this? End all foreign wars, stop the coups, and, you know, trim the Pentagon budget by 75%. There you go. That would save a lot of money, huh, Dave? What do you think?
What have you got against?
You just derailed the whole segment, Andrew. You got to just sit still for a minute. Good grief!
As a Scotsman, I've got to ask, what have you got against the coups, Andrew?
Yeah, no
coups, or is it their flatulence from the coups?
All right. The cows are getting lively now. Look, we all have to wait in the game of governing, but I think we got to ask ourselves: will this Trump econ bomb bust the budget? Will it grow the economy? Can it do both? I think we're just kind of standing on the cliff waiting for something to happen. And come stand with us, people. We'll let you know what's going on as soon as we know it. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, panel. Andrew, sit down. We are back to twist the brain. Have a little fun with our panel of overly excitable people. Andrew is running the board, so things will get weird, possibly confusing. So buckle up, friends and family. Here we go.
Hello, everybody. Yeah. You all know the tricks and games we've had at C5. From all the sweat I get from hosting this gig, I better slip into a dry martini. Anyway, my name is Andrew S. Moran. Can anyone guess what the S stands for?
Shut up.
Nope, Edka. You were close, though. You were close. I bet you're still on. Anyway, as you're all aware, these are our routine guests, and I must say, I never forget a face, but in all of your cases, I'll be glad to make an exception. So for our lovely first-time viewers, perhaps after dealing with Dave Patterson's obnoxious winning, it might be the last. This game is simple. Answer the questions, win the prizes, get them wrong. Well, I hope you enjoy the consolation banana. They say knowledge is power, but tonight, it's worth prize precisely $100 and a shiny trophy. On to the really big show, as my good friend Linda McMahon would say. And yes, I'm perfectly aware that it was Ed McMahon. Anyway, let's get the questions started here. Hold on. My computer's slow, like my brain, or like I am in the sack. Oh, never mind. No, you didn't hear what I said here. Anyway, question 1. Who joined FBI Director Kash Patel for an interview with Maria Bartiromo on Fox News last Sunday? Was it James Comey, Attorney General Pam Bondi, or FBI Deputy Dan Bongino?
Dan Bongino. I got it.
Sarah got that. Yeah, good job, Sarah. Good job. Question 2. Actually, I will say one thing. There was a great article on this titled "Assessing the Fallout from the Patel-Bongino Interview," and the lovely when I say lovely, Lisa Donna. Question number 2. Who co-authored the book Original Sin, President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and Its Disastrous Choice to Run? Was it CNN's Jake Tapper, Representative Nancy Pelosi, or economist, and I say economist loosely, Paul Krugman?
Jake Tapper.
Tapper.
Yes, Sarah got that again. She's 2 on the board. Isn't that absolutely amazing? So, sorry, has anyone read this book by this Mr. Tapper? Has anyone read this thing? Why, a 4-year-old child could understand this book. Run out and find me a 4-year-old child. I can't make heads or tail of this book. Anyway, question 3. In what state has the governor recently decided to ban homeless people from the streets? Was it Oregon, California, or New Jersey?
B, California.
Yes, Dave, that is correct. It is California. Has anyone been to California lately? Oh, I don't like that Gavin fella. I can't think of a joke right now because it just came to me. Anyway, question 4. Which world leader visited the White House on May 21st? Was it Claudia Sheinbaum, Mark Carney, or Cyril Ramaphosa?
C.
Yes, that is John. John is on the board with C, Cyril Ramaphosa. That was quite the entertaining segment there with Donald Trump and Ramaphosa. Question 5. What is... Oh, Dave, you're going to love this one. What is the Golden Dome? A Bitcoin factory, a missile defense shield, or Dave Patterson's
Missile
cheat sheet
defense
for
shield.
C5 trivia? Yes, it is missile defense shield. Dave has got the answer. And I believe at this stage it is Sarah Cowgill with 2, Dave with 1, and John with 1.
I thought we were in question 5.
No, my math is wrong. It's actually Dave has 2, I believe. Anyway, question 6. It doesn't matter. We all know Dave's going to lose this one. Question number 6. Name the bill the president signed on Monday, May 19th. Was it Take It Down Act, Fake No More Act, or Stop Cheap Fakes Now Act?
Take it down.
Sarah got that one. She is leading today. She is on fire. But we all
I'm on fire.
My microphone's off.
Everybody. She's always a hot cracker. Hi, everybody. Hi. Anyway, question 7. Name the agency that just downgraded America's long-term credit rating. Was it, like mine, I have a horrible credit rating. Have you seen it? Oh my goodness, you look all the way down to see my credit score. Anyway, was it S&P, NASDAQ, or Moody's?
C,
Moody's.
Moody's is correct, and I'm always in the moody for a nice, good old story about economics. And if you want to read more on that, you can read Andrew Moran's story, Moody's Late to the Party After U.S. Credit Downgrade. Question 8. What is the name of the Trump administration's new self-deportation program? No Takebacks, Project Homecoming, or Fast Pass?
Project Homecoming.
Yes, that is correct. Dave is correct. And this reminds me of an old joke I used to say. I would never want to belong to any club that have someone like me for a member. So it looks like I need to self-deport before even entering the country. Anyway, question 9. Which former Chicago mayor might be considering a run for a governorship or the presidency? Was it Lori Lightfoot, Brandon Johnson, or Rahm Emanuel?
C, Rahm Emanuel.
Yes, Dave. Yes, Dave is leading. But I will say though, I wonder if foot fetishists really like Lori Lightfoot. Anyway, the last question of C5 trivia. Oh boy, Sarah, please get this one correct so you can tie with Dave. Otherwise, Dave is the winner. Okay, last one. Which state in the Northeast just passed legislation that will prohibit cities from adopting policies that signal they are sanctuary destinations for illegal immigrants? Oh my, try saying that question 10 times. Is it New Hampshire, Vermont, or Massachusetts?
B, Vermont.
Oh, actually, no. Yeah, John got that correct. Is actually, yes, New Hampshire.
Did you derail Dave?
Regardless, Dave is the winner today, and I'm solely disappointed that he is the winner. I never want him to win this thing again, or I'm never going to host again, okay? Let's kick him off, and it's all just me and Sarah head back behind the green screen. What do you think of that? Woo! Anyway, so that is the game. That is all for C5 Trivia, and I will turn it back to Miss Sarah Cowgill.
Well, folks, thanks for playing. Again, hope we left you all with some smiles, dinner party facts, anecdotes, maybe some stuff to take Andrew down a peg whenever he comes back to hosting instead of our friendly little Marx brother. Anyway, we enjoyed you. Have a good one. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform. YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble, well, we're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation News has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. Now, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today for the latest news and commentary. Your choice for free thinking, free speech, libertynation.com.